Hello, BookTube. I have a page 112 tag for you today. In fact, I have two of them. This morning I saw a video from Shawn the Book Maniac in which he did a page 112 tag, and that put me in the mood. I love it when he does that. I love listening to him read anyway. But the page 112 tag is a thing of his own creation, where he adapted it from a French literary prize in which the judges determine the long list based on page 112 of the submitted books. And that's all. No title, no author, and especially not the hyper worked over and polished opening chapters. Shawn mentions in his video today, I'll leave a link to it, that he himself has encountered time after time, what I'm sure a lot of the rest of you have too, which is that the beginning of a book shows all the promise in the world and then it falls apart. Not necessarily right around page 112, but at a discrete point. It's usually, a third of its length in, and it's as if, at that point, a large number of people whose job it is to pay attention to the manuscript stopped paying attention to the manuscript. The idea is to catch the book in a kind of undress, and thereby see the kinds of things that it does or doesn't do on its own. I love the idea of the tag, not only because it gives you a chance to see people dig into the books in their collections, a lot of which you don't have, but also because, as I've mentioned a couple of times before when I've done this tag, it flexes your critical muscles. You are put in the position of those judges and forced to determine, well, what is this prose in front of me based on a fragment that obviously isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to you. So I want to do a page 112 tag to respond to Shawn. So this will also be a BookTube Parasite tag, which is another thing that he came up with, where you piggyback your own content off someone else's. But I want to do it twice. I will do this video and then I'll do a following video because the first time around I will yield to the still prevalent BookTube wimpishness of picking fiction. But then I want to do a nonfiction page 112 tag as well, just to cover my own side of the field. So the first we'll do is fiction. We'll do 3 fiction, and I will follow the same rules that Shawn follows, where I will read you the excerpt. Unfortunately, I will not read it as mellifluously as Shawn does. You knew that when you married me. And I also won't list the books down in the information section of the video. Instead, you will have to soldier on through to the end, because I want you to keep you as blind as the alleged judges would be in terms of what this thing is you're reading, so that you can just judge it on your own. So here is the first page 112. Susan looked up. Oh my. Distracted, she had failed to notice that the clouds had disappeared, revealing hundreds of twinkling stars. It's beautiful. You can see constellations. Ollie traced the sky with his hand. I think that one. Look, Susan pointed to a streak of light across the sky. Quick, make a wish. She closed her eyes and paused. What did you wish for? I'd rather not say, Susan said, opening her eyes. If I tell you, it won't come true. In Maine, we believe sharing wishes on shooting stars, Ollie said. We also disclose wishes involving birthday candles, dandelions, and ladybugs. And considering you're in the company of an American for this celestial event, I think you need to tell me. Susan felt a smile tugging at her lips. He moved closer. Do you want it to come true? Yes. Then you'll want to tell me. Very well, she said. I wished for an end to the war. A perfect wish. She paused. Some days I wonder if the bombs will ever stop. They will. Ollie looked in her eyes. I believe in you, Susan. I have confidence that the war will end, and I promise to do everything I can to help make it happen. His words comforted Susan like a blanket warmed by the sun. On an impulse, she leaned her head on his shoulder. He placed his arm around her, pulling her closer. Okay, so fairly banal. I mean, smoothly enough done. But it's a scene we've all seen a million times before. It could not be described any more demotically than that. There's a shooting star, there's some playful banter, perhaps the beginning of a romantic interest, a very hackneyed wish, and the very hackneyed aftermath. It's a World War II era fiction of a very comfortably predictable kind. Nothing bad about it, but it doesn't really intrigue, right? It doesn't really pull at you. So let's go to the next one, and we'll do. Let's see here. I am not reading strictly page 112. Obviously, this is not Nazi Germany. I'm not reading strictly page 112. I'm reading around in that area, the block in that area that makes as close to coherent sense as I can. So I'm not starting anybody in the middle of a sentence. I'm not starting any action in the middle of a movement. But you'll get the picture. So let's see here. Fallers were chopping and sawing trees, balancing 6 to 8 feet above the ground on metal-tipped boards hammered into the tree's side. This way they were above the swell of the tree's butt, making it easier to fell. 2 fallers to a tree. They swung their double-bitted axes alternately in steady, efficient rhythms, each bite of the axe taking out large chips of wood. Other fallers who'd already made their undercut were balanced on the backsides of the trees, pulling 12-inch long crosscut saws between them. Back and forth, each one pulling in turn, cutting toward the undercut, pouring oil or kerosene on the saw to keep it from binding, and occasionally driving wedges to keep the cut open. Sawing without a stop, sometimes for hours before the tree started to tremble, then groan as the remaining wood hinge between the undercut and the saw cut gave way with a sustained cracking sound. The fallers would then scramble for their lives as the huge tree moaned and whistled through the air, nearly silent once the splintering at its base ended, to smash into the earth, sending vibrations through the ground for hundreds of feet. The fallers would gather their equipment, walk to the next tree, and do it again. Hutula pulled out his pukho and began slashing at the hem of Matty's trouser legs about halfway up the boot. This is called stagging your trousers. You are less likely to get snagged on something, and if you do, you would much rather have your trousers rip than lose a leg. He stood, or worse, this is not a game for children. He looked carefully at the buttons holding Matty's suspenders and grunted, "Not too much thread, and no belt. Same reason." Matty knew that same reason meant you could die. "You pay attention," Hutula said, "all the time. No daydreaming about your girlfriends. I tell you to do something, you do it instantly. Watch everyone, all the time. Work from the uphill side wherever you can. If you lose your balance, always fall toward the rigging. Don't walk, don't run, fly. The place to rest is in the grave." Okay, orders of magnitude better, obviously. A quick and very dramatic look into a world, the world of killing gigantic trees, one after another, and an old pro dispensing advice that the old pro is probably not going to repeat. It's straightforward and it's hair-raising. So in terms of the page 112 tag benchmark of would you keep reading, I absolutely would keep reading. Yes, I would indeed. That was much better, I think. But of course, I'll be interested in your reactions to these as well. I wish that I could somehow import Shawn's reading voice to do this, but unfortunately I can't. You're stuck with my Boston quack. And then this will be the third one, and then all will be revealed, and we will talk about these a bit. "Why is this girl crying?" Solvi asked. "He dislocated my shoulder when he took my guardian's ship," said Freydis, surprising herself by speaking. Her voice sounded sullen to her ears, and she kept her eyes on Solvi's feet, which were shod in thick-soled boots. Threadbare wool wrappings covered his legs. "And then he made me pregnant. He says he will marry me, but I do not want him." Halbjorn whirled towards her and hit her across the jaw so suddenly that she was on the ground before she realized what had happened. Her head spun when she raised it, so she remained sitting where she fell, holding her hand to her face. Solvi's man from the field took hold of Halbjorn, wrenching his arms back. Freydis hoped it hurt. Solvi had another young guard who came up from behind the house, advancing toward Halbjorn with his dagger out. Freydis looked at Solvi. She saw an expression she recognized pass over his face, a deep and paralyzing fear, and then quickly disappear. She had only seen a man look that frightened once before, a man who had come to Alfrith to have his infected foot amputated. Alfrith had done a good job, but he had died of fright and shock under her knife. Solvi took a few steps toward Halbjorn. "You bring my daughter here and then abuse her before me?" he asked, in a forced whisper. If Freydis had not seen the fear on his face, she would have found it menacing. Halbjorn looked frightened. "She said she wasn't your daughter," said Halbjorn. He struggled against his captor. "I said that I had never acknowledged a daughter." Oh, no, he said you said she wasn't your daughter. "I said I had never acknowledged a daughter. I do so now. This is my daughter. Freydis Solvi's daughter, and her mother is Svanhild Ivan's daughter. She is a true-born daughter and my heir. Solvi took a deep breath. You say you are her intended? Based on what she said, I tell you that you are not. I say the child she bears is not yours. Halbjorn spat. Ask her. It is mine. She has spread her legs for me every night for a month. Whose else could it be? Solvi turned towards where Freydis still sat on the grass, tipped over where she had landed on the side of a tussock. Tell me, daughter, what would you have me know of this business? Do you want him to be the father of your child? The words were so exactly what she wanted to hear that her tears spilled over again. Okay, so very vivid, right? You can see the scene. A very dramatic thing in a way that the previous excerpt was not. The previous excerpt was imbued with dramatic tension, but it itself was not dramatic. It was a recitation of something that happens many, many times, not one time. It'd be different if it was one time. Think, for instance, of the great bison hunt in Lonesome Dove. When you see a bison hunt described in a history of the Plains Indians, it is exciting, but not in the way of that one particular hunt, where particular stakes are involved. Same thing with the description of the felling of the tree. It's got a dramatic tension to it, but it's not in itself dramatic. The only thing that's actually happening in that previous scene is a conversation, a bit of advice being given to somebody who is a follower or is apprenticing to be one. Whereas in this scene, things actually do happen. It is actually a dramatic moment, an important moment by the sound of it. I liked it quite a bit. I liked it quite a bit. So if we're looking at these three, I would probably go just for my own liking. I like fiction that really moves. I like fiction that takes my full attention for granted and expects it. So I would probably go with the third, with excerpt number 3 as my favorite one, followed by excerpt number 2, which, you know, it wasn't. I just of the random luck of the draw for page 112. It was a moment of instruction rather than plot development. But I really like the way it's written. I thought the way it was written was really powerful. And then my third choice would be the first excerpt that we heard, which isn't bad. It wasn't bad by any means. It was just, it struck me as the kind of fiction that I could probably just fly through without it ever really challenging me. It would be comfort historical fiction. And now I want to show you the books, and they are all historical novels. They're all historical fiction, part of the huge glut of historical fiction coming out in 2019. The first one that we saw was by Alan Hlad, and it's The Long Flight Home. It's a novel. I believe this is coming out. No, this is coming out. I thought it was a paperback original, but it's coming out in July in hardcover. And it's about pigeons. It's about messenger pigeons during World War II. The crew that set amid the London Blitz of World War II, when desperate British services enlisted homing pigeons to carry messages across enemy lines. The Long Flight Home is a bittersweet tale of courage, soulmates, and sacrifice. It is the story of an almost love affair between two people brought together and then driven apart by war. Susan, a young woman who trains homing pigeons in England, and Ollie, a crop duster from Maine, who disregards U.S. neutrality and travels to Britain in quest to join the Royal Air Force. Okay, that was just random chance. That was just a random lucky stroke that I happened to pick a scene that our page 112 happened to be a scene between the two main characters. I didn't anticipate that. And the book also tells me a little about. There's a full color historical insert that I think a lot of historical novels would be well advised to do. I think they do a lot better if they had something like this. This is the whole story of homing pigeons during the war. So you have the book. It's just a little booklet about that. Shows you there's a hand coming out of a tank about ready to release a pigeon. And the impetus for the book is that in 2012, the skeleton of a homing pigeon was found in an attic with a message that was encrypted, and no one at the time could read it. No one could tell what it was. Can you crack the code? And that put the author on the long trek to write this book. So it probably is going to be just what it felt like in that excerpt. It's probably going to be feel-good, non-threatening, non-paradigm shifting World War II historical fiction. Nothing wrong with that. I read a lot of that, and I like it a lot. So that was the first one. Then the second one was something we've seen on this channel before. It's a big thing. I think it's going to get a lot of press. And it may have reminded you a little of Barkskins by Annie Proulx, which is about, for its long opening stretch, it's about logging firms in young America, people carving down the virgin forests of America. And this is the same thing. This is Karl Marlantes, who wrote Matterhorn. This is Deep River, his big historical novel coming out in July, about that same subject. There you have a faller on a tree that has been sectioned up and is going to be carved and put on flatboard boats and sent downriver. This is a big novel about that. So this is the beginning parts of Barkskins, only one whole novel. And it's the author's follow-up to Matterhorn, which I admit, when I got this at the time, I told you, I didn't think that would ever happen. So this surprises and pleases me. It pleases me also that the chunks that I've read of it are so good. And then the last one, talk about pleasing Steve. This has pleased me from the beginning. I would have been amazed if this volume I have, in fact, read. I gobbled it up. I could not wait for this book. I have highly praised the two before it. This is the third book in a trilogy. And this is by Linnea Hartsoeker. This comes out in August. And this is The Golden Wolf, the third volume in her trilogy. Let's see here. The fates of Ragnvald and his sister Svanhild unfold to their stunning conclusion in this riveting final volume to the Golden Wolf saga, a trilogy that conjures the ancient world with a gripping detail, thrilling action, and vivid historical elements. Ragnvald has long held to his vision of King Harald as the Golden Wolf who will bring peace to Norway as its conqueror, even though he knows that Harald's success will eventually mean his own doom. He is grateful to have his beloved sister Svanhild once more at his side to help keep their kingdom secure. Free from the evil husband who used her, she is now one of Harald's many wives. While Svanhild is happy to be reunited with her beloved brother and enjoys more freedom than ever, she is restless and lonely. When an old enemy of Ragnvald's kidnaps his niece, Freydis, his sister follows the daughter she has neglected to Iceland, where old love awaits. And that we met that character in this excerpt. And if you know about the old love awaits, you will know, if you've read the previous two volumes in the series, you'll know that this book is going to braid together all of those plots and bring them to a conclusion. And oh my God, does it. The one thing I was worried about from this author, I fell in love with this series in the first book. I wasn't too much worried with the second one. The only thing I was worried about was something we've discussed on this channel before, which is a widespread inability of young and beginning authors to bring their stories to a satisfying ending. They just sort of stop. And that doesn't happen here. There is a rousingly satisfying ending. So we will talk about this later on, closer to when the time comes. But oh boy. So those were our three fictions for the page 112 tags. There was A Golden Wolf, Deep River by Karl Marlantes, and The Long Flight Home, about homing pigeons during World War II. That was my fiction page 112 tag. But I also want to do a nonfiction page 112 tag, just to keep your hand in here, because I'm encouraging all of you to read more nonfiction all the time. I'm hoping that maybe I'll be allowed to co-host nonfiction in November. A lot of water under the bridge between now and then. But in the meantime, we're going to do a page 112 tag. So I will adjourn here, and then we'll go right back to that. Thank you, BookTube.